The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Daily Racing Form's Breeders' Cup Prep Race Preview Webinar. I'm your host, Dan Illman, and I'm delighted to have two special guests with me. First, he's a handicapper, analyst, columnist, foreign correspondent, and reporter, the rare jack of all trades and master of all trades, Eclipse Award winner, Marcus Hersh. Our next guest needs no introduction, but if there were a Mount Rushmore for horse players, his face would be most prominent of all. Creator of the Beyer Speed Figures and author of some of the most influential handicapping works ever written, the great Andy Beyer. Gentlemen, in this webinar, we'll take a look at the 6 Breeders' Cup Challenge win and you're in races at Santa Anita and Belmont on Friday and Saturday. The action begins on opening day at Santa Anita with Friday's Grade 1 Chandelier Stakes. It kicks off a 50-cent late pick 5. Marcus, let's start with you. Bob Baffert's Bast leapt to the head of the division with her maiden win in the Del Mar Debutante. Are there any real knocks on her on Friday? She is trying 2 turns for the first time, as are most of these fillies.
Well, yeah, you just hit the main thing. I mean, you're going to be taking odds on a horse who's never been 2 turns before, but I don't look at that as necessarily a knock in this case. Stretching out because she didn't win first time out for Baffert. I mean, if he's got these horses cranked up to go really fast, 5.5 furlongs in their debut, then, and you look at their pedigree and maybe they're a little iffy route wise, then you start to wonder. But that's not this horse. I mean, she didn't have blinkers first out. She didn't have all that much speed. She ran a perfectly fine race against a horse who was just quicker than she was, Inspiressa, who she turned around and walloped in the Del Mar Debutante with blinkers added. And then pedigree wise, if you look at she's by Uncle Mo, he's fine. He can get a good horse off. They often like the grass, but on the bottom side, I mean, there's just stamina influences everywhere. And just looking at the way the filly goes and how she's relaxed, I'm not trying to take this favorite down just because I think she can't stay or anything. I think she's the most talented horse in the race, and I think she's going to handle the 2 turns.
You do have a long shot that you're a little bit interested in, though, Marcus, down towards the inside. Let's talk about the horse that's tried the 2 turns.
Oh, KP Dreamin', yeah. I mean, been studying her, the one horse. She's all right. I mean, she doesn't run against that much, but this isn't a very deep field either. But I just thought that although that horse relaxed and has had a couple challenging trips, KP Dreamin' it's already been 2 turns, as you mentioned. She did not get a high Beyer speed figure 69, but that was fine. Second time out, she had a traffic-filled trip, ran in the same race as Inspiressa and Bast first out. When she got through, she finished all right at 50-1. I don't think she was well meant in that race at all. And then second time out, the jockey had to tap on the brakes. Well, stay on the brakes around the far turn for a little while, just waiting for things to clear up. And then she came willingly through on the inside. Put her nose through the horse that had left room between that horse and the rail. Went on through there and pulled away, I thought, pretty nicely. The pedigree is route oriented. I'm not a huge fan of the sire Union Rags, but when his horses are good, they often go 2 turns. I thought she might. Well, there's not going to be a ton of exact value no matter where you turn in this race, but if there was one horse who I thought might have a chance to take a step forward and beat the favorite, and I don't think it's a great chance, it's a pretty small percentage chance, it would be KP Dreamin'.
Andy, Bast, the logical favorite in this race. We are kicking off a pick 5 single.
Yeah, I think so. Bast's figure of 85, should be more than good enough to win here. And there was the figure was absolutely legitimate. Of the 4th place finisher in that race, Lazy Daisy, came out of there and won a stake at Churchill Downs. There's Bast certainly proved herself by beating a legit stakes horse, and the only horse who's run a figure anywhere near that was actually was Luca Thea's next to last race, course, he got a figure of 91. It was a legitimate number, but that was loose on the lead at 5.5 furlongs against maiden claimers, and she came back and got buried last time. So I can't see her. I mean, I was trying to make a case for Marcus's horse, KP Dreaming, for the exact horse, and I guess on the basis of going a mile, I mean, she could be the one. But even though she had a little traffic last time, that was, basically a soft trip, coming up the rail against a tiring speed horse. So if it's not Bast here, I don't know where I'd go.
Andy, we'll move on to the 8th race at Santa Anita on Friday, the Grade 1 American Pharoah. It's a race with obvious Breeders' Cup juvenile implications. 8 Rings got a big fig for his debut before the old disastrous odds-on/lost rider, Delmar Futurity. Even with that fig, though, I believe you're still a little bit dubious.
The figure is legitimate. I mean, there's no question about that. But when we do figures for 2-year-old races, we see an awful lot of occasions where even small stretch outs for lightly raced 2-year-olds are a huge obstacle for them. I mean, like horses sometimes going from 5.5 to 6 furlongs, or from stretching out from 6 furlongs to 7 furlongs, just fall off the map, for no reason you can see, except that the distance might have been too much of a hurdle for them. Well, 8 Rings, I mean, you obviously draw a line through the last start. That doesn't count. But he's had a lone 5.5 furlong race, and now is going a mile in the 16th. I mean, it's challenging. I mean, obviously he's got one of the great trainers of all time in his corner, and Baffert certainly knows how to stretch him out. But I wouldn't want to take a short price or make a single. And I looked. This was to me one of the most interesting race of the 6 we're doing, and I looked hard at these horses, and I'm gonna use Shoplifted as my key alternative to the favorite. Steve Asmussen has, I mean, of course, he's been around a long time. We know what an accomplished trainer he is, but he and maybe I'm just noticing, some things about him, but he has done such good work with 2-year-olds lately. I mean, this year, I just looked up in Formulator. He's won 27 maiden special weight races with 2-year-olds all over the country. I mean, he just gets them ready, and I find when I'm handicapping, there are just many occasions where I sort of look past an Asmussen horse, and he, who might have had like one dull race in his last start, and they just often just win right in my face. And Shoplifted has that look to me. I mean, he won his debut with a figure of 83. He really exploded at the end of the race, although the horses in front of him were weakening, but it was nevertheless, I thought, visually impressive. Last time, he just never got into the race early. I mean, it might have been a sloppy track. But also, Asmussen had a 3-horse entry in that field, and one of them, was Gazilla, a fast speed horse. So he probably didn't want Shoplifted up, up too close to his favorite in the race. But Shoplifted got into gear late. I think this horse is probably going to step up from that 83, and it's my my best idea in this race.
Marcus, I think you'd agree with Andy. 8 Rings has the talent. There are some question marks, obviously, coming out of the last race and stretching out in distance. One of the horses that he beat in his maiden race, Express Train, well, he doesn't have any worries about distance because he stretched out in his second lifetime start, and he just destroyed a field.
Yeah, I would also agree very much with Andy about this race being the most interesting of the 6. I thought and I did the same thing. I took a deeper dive into this just because I saw a lot of horses here that caught my eye. I mean, it's a way deeper field than the Philly race. There's a lot more substance here, a lot more meat on the bone. And yeah, I mean, 8 Rings, I remember seeing a lot of talk, first time out, he showed so much speed. Oh, he's my empire maker. If he's got that much speed going 5.5, how good is he going to be going long? Well, I mean, yeah, that's one theory of it. But another theory is that each horse is an individual and they get, a lot of influences on the dam side too. And the dam was a sprinter. And I mean, this horse looks pretty scopy. He's got a pretty lengthy stride. Maybe he is a road horse, but I mean, he did have a ton of 5.5 furlong speed first out. Obviously had been lighting up the work tab at 3 to 5 first out. And okay, so yeah, we draw a line through the last race, definitely. But at the same time, what made him do what he did? And now he's blinkers on. I mean, he just, he had a front end trip going pretty much as fast as he could first time out. Does he have the mental composition to be a 2-turn horse right now, even if he has the physical capabilities? And you're just taking the worst of it as far as the odds, as Andy mentioned. He's just going to be a short price. So, if he, runs a big race and wins by 4 lengths, it's not going to surprise me at all. But, given the price, I was willing to try to take him on a little bit. And one of the horses I did consider was the horse Andy likes, Shoplifted, who I think has a lot of merits. I do. On one hand, I have concerns about his pedigree. It's very sprinty and short. But on the other hand, I think the trainer knows his horses pretty well. Knows what their limitations are. He's taking the trouble to ship this horse way out west to run 2 turns. And, getting a mile and 16th this time of year as a 2-year-old is one thing. It's not like you have to go a mile and a half in June of the 3-year-old season. I mean, he doesn't have to be a true route horse to stay enough. And I really think that he broke slowly. I don't think he loved the mud. And I too was impressed with the way he leveled off at the end and I thought was making good progress through the last furlong and a half or so. But yeah, the horse that I settled on, to win, and it's not a strong choice, was Express Train. And, it's John Shearer versus Bob Baffert, first time out 5.5 furlongs. I mean, I think I'm saying he debuted in the same race as 8 Rings. I think you could guess which horse was probably farther along and better meant and sharper to debut. And they ran absolutely like that. I did think that I liked the way Express Train traveled in that race. And then, if you just look at his running line from the mile race, it looks like a pretty straightforward, clear-cut trip, but he had the rail. Mike Smith let 2 horses surround him past the 3 furlong pole. He was actually 3/4 of a length behind while between horses, and then Smith just tapped on him and boom, he was back in front in 2 strides. He ended up having a pretty easy journey. I don't think there was a ton of quality in that field by any stretch of the imagination, but I do like the way he went about his business, and I am convinced that he's going to stay, and I think he'll settle behind horses nicely too. I mean, there were a couple other horses that looked a little bit interesting. I think American Theorem has a lot of talent. It's very unusual to see a horse running with blinkers off after debuting with a win first time out. You got to get special permission to do that. But I can see why the trainer is thinking that, because he was too keen, I thought, in his first race going 5.5. So how's he going to settle going 2 turns? And then you got the undefeated horse on the outside, Collusion Illusion. I ended up liking him less watching him than you would just off the form. I mean, he got a perfect trip first time out. He was under heavy pressure to win second time. I'm not convinced he's going to love 2 turns. So, I'm taking on the favorite with. I'd be happy to use either of those 2 horses, Shoplifted or Express Train.
Shoplifted, Express Train, 2 alternatives to the expected big favorite, that being 8 Rings. Saturday's Breeders' Cup Challenge Series action begins at Belmont with the 4th race. It's the Grade 1 Vosburg. There's no show wagering thanks to the presence of Imperial Hint, who won this race last year. We are expecting the number 1 Call Paul to scratch and run in an easier spot at Delaware. Marcus, it's a shame that a historically important race like this has such a short field. Any use trying to beat Imperial Hint?
Well, I toyed with the idea of it, yeah. And the reason being, I mean, yeah, he was 6-1 in the Vanderbilt when he ran off the screen. Just, a tremendous performance. Here he's 3-5 on the line, so he's coming off the fastest figure of his career, 1:14, and that was obviously in a legitimately very fast race. And also, he may have been on the best part of that racing surface that day too, with that sweeping move from a stalking position. And the third thing is he's drawn inside the other main speed in the race, Promises Fulfilled, who was abysmal in the forego last time. Although, I'm willing to draw maybe a light pencil line through that race just because he had the rail. The rail might not have been good. He was under pressure, a weird slow pace. I don't like Promises Fulfilled. And the field is so short that I decided in the end, even if Promises Fulfilled comes out winging, Imperial Hint doesn't have to go with them. If it's a pace that's too fast, Castellano can take a light hold of him and come right around and get to his outside. If they were to get in a knockdown drag out duel, Forenza Fire is the one that would capitalize. He is this is his best chance to win a race like this, in my opinion. He's fine going 7/8, but I think making one big run into a fast pace, going 3/4 over the Belmont track, which seems to me clearly his favorite surface, that's where he's going to have a chance to win a race like this. But in the end, I don't think he's going to.
Andy, let's look at that 1:14 Beyer speed figure earned by Imperial Hint in his most recent start. This is a very
It was good.
fast
And not
horse.
only was it good, it could have been higher. We came to the conclusion that the track had really sped up for a couple races late in the card, and that's something that happened at Saratoga a fair amount of time. And so if we, if we hadn't sort of tamped it down, that number could have been in the stratosphere. Any way you cut it, it was quite a good race. I was surprised that Marcus didn't give a more full-throated endorsement of Promises Fulfilled, because we had a little email back and forth after the Travers Day card, when he referred to the dead rail, and he's that's the majority view. I was at Saratoga for the last week of the meeting, and I thought that there was almost a little bit of a mass hysteria going on about the condition of the rail. It became almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Andy Serling, who knows, as much about New York racing as anybody and watches the races certainly more closely than I do, has thought that the rail was dead for much of the meeting and would say so on the NYRA telecast. And I think a lot of the time, the jockeys had to pick up on that, and owners and trainers were aware of it. So, there are many cases where jockeys would turn for home on the rail and they'd angle into the 3 or 4 path just so if they got beat, nobody would second guess them for being on the dead rail. So I was a little confused by the conditions there, but dead rail or not, I thought Promises Fulfilled was just too bad last time for me to consider, and I really can't. I couldn't really make a case for anybody else.
Well, Andy, the Jockey Club Gold Cup race number 10 features some 3-year-olds against their elders. I know you have some thoughts on the quality or lack thereof of this 3-year-old male division, so go ahead and let him have it, and then tell us which older horse you fancy on Saturday.
Well, now I only started covering the Triple Crown in 1970, so I have a limited perspective on its whole history. But this was about as bad a Triple Crown series as I've ever seen, and certainly from the standpoint of speed figures, it was the worst since we've been publishing our numbers. I mean, the 101 for the Derby, 99 for the Preakness, 95 for the Belmont. I just don't, I haven't liked any of these horses except for Maximum Security. At least, has a good raw speed and is a consistent runner. But so even though Code of Honor and Tacitus got good figures running 1-2 in the Travers, I just could not bring myself to bet, any of these, the members of this 3-year-old crop when they're stepping up against older company. I'm just gonna just toss them on just basic loathing for the class of 2019, and I think who does that leave? Preservationist and Vino Rosso 1-2. I mean, Preservationist has. He's 6 years old. He's really come into his own this year. He got a good figure winning the Suburban, although probably with a track where the rail was fairly good. But I mean, his Whitney was no disgrace. I mean, he was had a gun from the outside post and got hung up 5 wide, and didn't do he wasn't disgraced. And then he came back and ran a solid race in the Woodward with a figure of 106. So to me, he's got clearly the horse to beat, and I'm going to just bet a 4-3 exacta and toss the 3-year-olds.
So perseverance and patience have paid for Preservationist Marcus,
Yep.
a 6-year-old with only 10 lifetime starts. He's obviously had his share of infirmities, but it looks like Jimmy Jerkins has him full throttle right now. And perhaps one of the great assets that he has in this race is his tactical speed. We saw him basically on the lead in the Suburban. We saw him mired in behind horses in the Woodward till about the 3/16 pole when he came clear. Basically, Junior Alvarado can play the brake and do what he wants with this horse.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I guess that my microphone isn't on when Andy's talking, but I was applauding loudly everything that he said regarding the 3-year-old crop. I'm sorry, but I second it wholeheartedly. I've had some disagreements with people about this, but I feel exactly the same way that he does regarding these horses. And I love Preservationists. I mean, I just wish there were a few more horses that had, some sort of credentials to help his price a little bit. I feel like the line might not be that great in this way. The line maker at Belmont does a really good job, don't get me wrong, but I kind of feel like Preservationist might end up being solidly favored. Maybe not. I hope not. If he's the second choice, I just think that's a misbet, because I don't know what happened. I agree with Andy that he didn't disgrace himself in the Whitney, but I also just don't think he didn't even run his race at all. I mean, the washy comment, in the chart is totally accurate. This horse didn't look right to me that day for whatever reason. And he really showed me something in the Woodward, because that was a much more demanding trip than he had in the Suburban. And he really had to fight and do some different things over the Saratoga track going 1 mile and an eighth in order to win. And I just feel like everything about the horse suits 1 mile and a quarter and the sort of oval that Belmont is much better than that kind of race. And you mentioned, Dan, his tactical speed, the cozy draw outside the other horses. I mean, I just think he's going to win easily. I mean, I as skeptical as I am of the 3-year-olds, I feel similarly about Vino Rosso. I do think he stays. I think he's a complete plotter. I know they skipped the Woodward. This is supposed to be his big chance. I don't think his Gold Cup win has aged well. I don't think that gift box was ever really that good. He was good at the right time. And of the 2 3-year-olds, I mean, we can go back to the dead rail thing. And Andy did say some things that I totally agree with about dead rails generally, about self-fulfilling prophecies. I think that is absolutely something that comes into play. But I do think that the inside was much the worst on that day. And Tacitus spent too much time on it in the end, while Code of Honor got the perfect slingshot outside trip 8 wide in the upper stretch. I just wonder if you reverse those trips, if you might have reversed the results. Even I don't think that Code of Honor has, to me, any clear talent edge over Tacitus, and I would, at the prices, play Tacitus over Code of Honor, but I'm hoping that Preservation is indeed the second choice.
So both Andy and Marcus like the older horses in the Jockey Club Gold Cup as they take on the 1-2 finishers of the Midsummer Derby, Code of Honor and Tacitus. Marcus will head back to Southern California for Saturday's Grade 1 Rodeo Drive Stakes. It's the 9th at Santa Anita. Bo Recall's probably going to be favored for Brad Cox. And boy, she's improved by leaps and bounds this year for her new trainer. This is a little bit different. She was fourth in this race last year. Do you have some concerns about her stretching out to the 1.25 miles?
Well, that is one of my primary concerns, and she is the fastest horse in the race with easily the best credentials. And if she's capable of making that jump, then she's going to win. I suspect she's bet below 9-5, which is her morning line. And I mean, she's just thrived being a mile or a mile and a 16th horse. And maybe she can deliver the same sort of punch going 1.25 miles, but she's not really bred for it. And I don't think it's not an apples to apples thing to compare her race last year because it was for a different trainer. And it was after the barn change and circuit change that she really found herself. I mean, she beat Got Stormy, who is a fabulous filly in her own right. And also, I mean, the other thing is, like, go back through these running lines. When did she last have a break? In the 19th century, she has been going steadily since forever and churning out race after race after race, shipping to the West Coast, shipping to New York, shipping back to the West Coast again. I mean, at the price, I don't love any of these horses. I don't think there are especially good horses in this race, but I am settled on Paved, who is a disappointing 5-2 on the line. That doesn't seem like a very attractive price on her, and I wouldn't bet her to win at that price. But I do think that this is a horse that, she's run 1 mile, 16th mile, and an 8th in her 2 starts since taking a long break from December to July. And this, I'm guessing, was probably the goal all along. I mean, she was a close second in the race to Vasilika, or Vasilika, I don't know how to say it actually, last year. And that was the best race she ran all last year. I think that she's going to be sitting on a top race, which isn't like a world-beating race, but I do think that she's run creditably in her 2 starts that leading up to this. And I think she's going to be a considerably better price than Bo Recall, and I think she can beat her.
Now, Andy, I think Paved might be kind of the wise guy horse in this race. Everybody I've talked to about the Rodeo Drive this year kind of is on Paved for many of the reasons that Marcus mentioned. Do you agree?
I do. Without any real enthusiasm, I found this a very very tough race to get a handle on. One, because there's no speed in the race except for Mirth, who just isn't good enough. And Bo Recall, I just think just off the distance factor, you got to bet against. I mean, she's gone 1.25 miles 3 times. She's finished 4th, 5th, and 6th. She just is not 1.25 mile horse. Now, maybe just on sheer ability, I mean, she can beat these. But if it is not she, I mean, Paved to me, I mean, her race in the Rodeo Drive last year was class wise was a very good one. I mean, Vasilika's now won 12 of her last 14 starts. Cambodia, whom she beat, won the yellow ribbon. You could really say that that Michael McCarthy was probably pointing for a repeat in this race. I mean, a couple shorter preps, and and now this is the big objective. I don't know, but I think Paved is the most plausible horse here.
Yep, and I kind of agree with you guys. The distance might be the great equalizer, and she's pretty good in her own right. It looks like now in her 3rd start of the year, she might be cycling back to her form. But she was very good in this race last year as a 3-year-old filly. Race 10 at Santanita on Saturday. The Grade 1 Awesome again, $300,000 purse for going a mile and an eighth. It features the best handicap horse in the country, and that is Mickey.
Dan, you're fading out.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm fading out.
Okay, you're faded back in.
All right, I'm faded back in. Higher Power's got speed towards the inside. I'm curious as to what you guys think of the pace situation of this race, because we know the McKenzie is very, very versatile. Do you think Flavien Prat's going to send Higher Power in the Awesome again out to the lead and try to take this race to McKenzie? Either way, McKenzie has a great advantage breaking outside of this horse. Andy, I'll let you go first.
You know, first of all, I dispute the notion that is now seemingly universal in horse racing, that sitting outside another horse is some great tactical advantage. When you're, my whole life as a horse player, I've loved speed on the rail, and I still do. And, if you've got post one and you've got the chance to take the lead and save ground at the first turn, do it. Force the other guy's hand. So, these horses, McKenzie looks like the faster horse. He can probably have the lead if he wants it. But I don't see anybody having a real pace advantage in this race.
And McKenzie, obviously, just looking at his figures that we see on the screen right now, just a consistent string of triple digits, topped by that 111 last time out in the Whitney, where he professionally sat off the lead after he pressured a little bit early, took off nicely. Mike Smith made all the right moves that day. He's just obviously way the horse to beat. I think most folks are going to single him in multiple race wagers. Is that how you're going to play it?
Well, he's the best horse. Leaving even figures aside, just from the class standpoint, if I may use that term, he's really been running against some of the best older horses around. Solid Grade 1 winners. He lost, even going a mile, he lost to Matoli, he beat Thunder Snow. Both solid Grade 1 types. He's the one to beat, but Higher Power ran a very legitimate race last time. The figure of 107, could have been higher. Let's say it was at least a 107, and even though I thought he had a pretty soft trip, just chasing a horse a leader who collapsed and then inheriting the lead. I couldn't love the race much beyond, the 107, but he's a legitimate contender. That 107 or thereabouts is going to put him there, make him good enough to give, McKenzie a little race. I can't see anybody else.
Marcus, thoughts on this one? Higher Power, legit off the Pacific Classic, or do you need to see it again?
Well, I would be happy to guess that it was real if he were a better price, but he's clearly the solid second choice. I think that the line is bad in this race too. I think McKenzie will be lower than the listed odds. The reason to support Higher Power is, 4-year-old barn change. They had blinkers on briefly over the winter and then put them back on, turf, back to dirt. So really, it was his first time on dirt with blinkers for Sadler and the West Coast. So maybe that's just, you could make the case. He's got a really nice pedigree. He's bred to be anything. Maybe that's just who he is. And I'd be happy to make that case if he were 9-1 again. But the other perspective is, the Del Mar track was a little deep and funky. A lot of horses didn't seem to love it this summer. He went 1.25 miles, which really might have brought out the best in him. He just outstayed a very weak group and ran well. There's no question about it. But at the price, I would my inclination is more towards skepticism than belief. I mean, the other horse worth a mention is the enigmatic Seeking the Soul, who was absolutely abysmal. I mean, I have to think he hated Del Mar. He didn't lift his feet in that race, and he's not a great horse. He's clearly better than that. I mean, his Stephen Foster was good. His Pegasus was, I mean, if he runs back to one of those races, he can easily finish second, but I don't, Mackenzie, in barring the totally unforeseen, is just going to win this race. He's got the right position, in the draw and tactically, and he's a fabulous horse. I don't know how he's going to cope with a 1.25 miles against presumably better stock in the Breeders' Cup Classic, although that better stock thing remains to be seen. But at 1 1/8 miles in a field like this, he's very formidable.
Well, there you have it. 6 Breeders' Cup Challenge Series races at Santa Anita and Belmont on Friday and Saturday. Andy, Marcus, I want to thank you both for your expert analysis. I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar, and I want to remind everyone that it will be archived shortly on the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel and at video.drf.com. Thanks so much for coming out and participating in the webinar, and we'll see you soon for Breeders' Cup.